Not because he's right, he's just,
I know.
Even a blind
your
squirrel finds
state's
it up
fault.
once in a while.
Yeah, right.
this has been promulgated since 1887 or 8, whatever it is.
Yes, I know. I mean, like, I've never been up to the Pennsylvania Wilds or whatever the heck that area is called, but...
They should do it in the Jersey Pine Barrens. Where the Jersey Devil works.
I don't know. I mean, like, just go talk to Governor Shapiro and Bill Murphy. I'll be back.
Craig Costello once told me he and his brother ran out of gas in the Pine Barrens. The sun was going down. No one around. He's petrified of the Jersey Devil. So he was scared to death. And he was like 20 at the time. It's not when he was 5. Imagine that.
You know, we're board games.
Yeah.
There's this board game that is just those critters from like those regional.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's cool.
The Jersey Devil, the Chupacabra.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
All right, I guess we'll get going. Okay, welcome to our weather discussion. We're here on Groundhog Day again. And
Well played, sir.
yeah. All right, I'm just going to get on my little soapbox here. Some of you are. There's no other profession in the world that annually subjugates itself to embarrassment, humiliation, and ridicule upon transferring its powers to a rodent or a collection of rodents who have no insight about even, what they're going to eat next. So there's no competition yet, but apparently Punxsutawney Swill forecasts a 6-week end to the winter. It's going to be an early end. But I'll give you some reasons today why that's a decent guess by the rodent and a reasonable prediction by us sentient human beings. At least it'll be my opinion. I'll show you some things that are of some interest to that. But, as I told my class, I do every year, the best thing that ever came out of Groundhog Day is the movie. And if you haven't seen it, you are robbing yourself of a cultural delight. You just have to see that movie. It's fantastic. I love the scene when they're drinking and he's had 100,000 attempts to impress her, and he says, "What'd you do in college?" And she says, "I studied medieval French poetry." And he says, "What a waste of time. I mean, for someone who isn't you," or something. And then the next scene, he's quoting, some poet in perfect French. It's hilarious.
Yep.
Anyway, I don't want to give it away. All right, we're done with this.
Well, except that on the right, that's one of our alumni.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right.
It's
It's Amanda Morton. Yeah, that's right.
Usually one
So we've got people everywhere. And if any of you were at AMS, you know that. I mean, you walk around with a Wisconsin badge on, everybody knows who you are. Let's start with the satellite movie, Pete. You're already thinking about me.
Viz or IR?
I like the color viz is okay.
You've come to the dark side.
Well, a little
You
bit.
used to not like that color viz.
No, I don't like being robbed of what I'm familiar with. But now I've gotten more familiar with this,
Okay.
and so it's part of the lexicon.
That's good.
But look at the widespread fog, low stratus clouds. It's not all fog, because it's not fog here, I don't think, but it's low stratus. And you can certainly discern where it is. It goes all the way up to the northern part of Saskatchewan. So it's a widespread region of high humidity, relatively cool air, and boundary layer stratus on top. That's not the story of the day. I think the story of the day is the absence of organized weather systems over the eastern 2/3 of the United States, and probably, arguably, North America. There's really nothing organized in the prairie provinces and in the eastern provinces either. So this is a widespread region of a lack of weather. And we'll see from a variety of other perspectives, the temperatures are exceedingly unusual in most locations. We'll see the hemisphere is kind of convulsing at this point in the winter. It's not behaving the way it should normally. And also, there doesn't seem to be anything in the near-term forecast to alleviate that, at least in the Western Hemisphere. So it's really quite an interesting story on many levels. One thing that's cool, we saw this, I think, when we were away, too, in Baltimore, is the exceptionally and continuous cold advection that's coming, raking the Labrador Sea. And you can see the lee of the Greenland ice cap right there. It's really pretty interesting how you can see it in the lack of stratus cloud, but it's stratocumulus. But really strong cold advection. Here's a cyclone of decent organization, I guess directly south of Newfoundland, and then that's really about it. There's a little bit of light precipitation in the middle Atlantic today, but one doesn't really see an obvious disturbance tied to it. And then generally unsettled weather in the western third of the country, but again, no really obvious disturbance that is helping to organize any of that unsettled weather. And then widespread open cellular convection over the Pacific Ocean all the way down to the Baja Peninsula, which means pretty cold air. And then there's a cyclone to the east of Hawaii, and there's an even more monstrous cyclone in the southern Bering Sea, which we may see on the West Coast satellite image. So that's the broad picture. It's a lot of words, but it's not a lot of storms. as you can see. So rather boring February 2nd for us this year. So let's take a look, Pete, if we can, at the west coast, just to get the broad complexion right off the bat.
I'm gonna do, whoop, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's great.
Because
that
the
works.
color is gonna be dark.
So here you can see something struggling to kind of become counterclockwise circulation here at the end of a, I think it was really obviously a broad ridgy flow, acyclonic flow. So that's not well organized. And these clouds are, you know, relatively cold cloud tops, and I can't remember if they're precipitating or not. We'll see when we go to the radar. This feature here is trying to get itself put together, but there's nothing really helping it do so. There's a nice little circulation center right there around Midway Island, or maybe further north of Midway Island, but very small scale. Look at how small that is. It's just spinning around in the cold air. And then there's the monster at the date line. So that's a big storm. I don't know what its sea level pressure is, but we'll go to Alicia and take a look. There's going to be a series. The Atlantic, the Pacific Basin's the place to be the next week. It's going to be one after another, really interesting storms. One in particular deepens very rapidly, and I can see no discernible upper feature associated with it. So that's interesting to me. But that might have been just because of first glance, and we can look at it together and see if I was wrong. It probably was. And then stationary, bitterly cold air over Alaska and the Yukon Territory. That's kind of a nice signal as well. And usually when it's cold there, it's not cold here. They almost never are cold at the same time. And so that's another harbinger of, you know, continued almost spring, not quite spring. You know, my son's dog is over this weekend, so I had to walk him this morning. In a couple of moments, as anybody who's ever walked a dog realizes you got to take your gloves off every once in a while. And my hands got a little cold there, but that was it. Other than that, it felt like spring. So it's unbelievable. Okay, Pete, thanks for that. Let's take a look at the radar summary over the continental U.S. to set the stage. And really, I just repeat myself. Here's the only little bit of precipitation, most of it falling on the state of New Jersey, so, you know, who could even tell? And then a little bit over Long Island. And then some precipitation a little bit better organized and maybe a little bit more intense across the panhandles of Oklahoma, Texas, and into the central part of Texas. And then widely scattered across the west, especially widely scattered across the northern part of California. So intermittent showers all the way from the northern portion of the coast down to south of San Francisco and in the interior as well. And it doesn't look like very much of that cloud along the Oregon-Washington coast, or just inland from the coast, is precipitating much. There's a little bit of echo. These are open cellular cells because it's pretty chilly aloft. I'm going to guess it's maybe minus 25-ish at 500 millibars there, and we'll check that in just a minute. But notice that, you know, 2/3-ish of the continental United States has not only got no radar echo, but much of this had no clouds except the low clouds over the northern plain states that we saw. So a decent February 2nd around much of the country. Certainly no particularly devastating weather anyway today. Okay, let's take a look, Pete, at the 500 millibar first.
Okay, so before we do this.
Yeah.
You set me up, well, you said that it looked like the northern hemisphere was convulsing.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember how Melissa Breed and I used to see things, mostly animals and stuff? But
Oh,
the
yes.
patterns and stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me if I'm wrong, but when I looked at the 500 millibar map this morning, you're all familiar with that painting, The Scream?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Ed Bod, whatever his name is, going like this on the bridge. Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it looks more like a pug.
Yeah, it does look like
I could see
that's
that
what
too. I
Melissa
could see
would
that,
see.
but I'm just like, I don't know, it looks like The Scream.
That's true, it
Anyways.
is. And look at the temperature over Lake Winnipeg at 500 millibars, minus 12. That's ridiculous.
Wow.
That is ridiculous. That's like a New Orleans temperature at 500 millibars in January. And in fact, it is. It's colder at New Orleans at 500 millibars than it is over Lake Winnipeg. That's ludicrous. And so it's a consequence of this gigantic ridge sitting in the central part of the continent, downstream of which is about 2/3 of the country, and that's all in this region of really weak but probably certain upper convergence because it has the downstream trough. So everywhere in this channel, the air is converging and sinking over Indiana, Ohio, parts of Illinois. And here, it's barely doing anything because it's straight, and then it's anticyclonically curved, so it stops sinking over northeastern Manitoba. So it's a widespread response to this big ridge, and this is a high altitude ridge, goes all the way up to the archipelago. And there doesn't seem to be anything digging on its western side, because it's a little bit convoluted flow at mid and high latitudes in the eastern Pacific Basin, and then appears to be a really strong geopotential height gradient, probably reflected in a subtropical jet down to the south of California and then to the west. So it's a really weird February 2nd map. And everywhere with this kind of a high amplitude flow, you don't really get sustained development. You get a little bit of upper divergence immediately down shear of the trough axis, but then the flow is so straight and hardly even confluent until you get to Greenland that you can't sustain it. And so you have that little blip of precipitation, no substantial development threat. The same is true here over Nevada and into Utah. That's just too straight a flow downstream. There's not going to be any supporting agiostrophy, and it's all going to be tied where the convergence actually is, and that's small little spots on the map. So really interesting. The only one that deviates from that is the feature well off the coast, even east of Bermuda, and we saw in the satellite that's a pretty decent looking cyclone. It's well organized, kind of put together, seemingly developing. There's billowing clouds on the northeast side of it, and here's your upper trough axis, and then downstream there's a ridge undoubtedly being enhanced by the latent heating from those clouds. And so that's self-developing. All these other ones maybe don't. Never occurred to me. I wonder if self-development is constrained by wavelength. It makes some sense that if the wavelength is too big, you just don't get the feedbacks that enhance development in the self-development way. So I wonder if there isn't a threshold that one could almost test if one had a really nice idealized model or something. Anyway, maybe that's true. And so let me keep going. If the flow gets wavier and the amplitude, which I've not measured, the amplitude of the waves gets bigger, maybe you stop having one mode of intense explosive cyclogenesis. That is the self-developing mode. Kind of interesting. Turn the broadcast off, Pete. These are pearls. We don't want to give them away. So anyway, that's a really interesting map. Let's see how it's reflected at various other levels. Beginning, this time, Pete, let's go to 300 this time. We often go down. Well, first of all, yeah, look at that. So there's your subtropical type jet, 179 knots off the coast, exactly where we expected it would be. Remember, it was before we even left for Baltimore, there was scuttlebutt on the Albany map serve about the lengthy jet around the globe. It still hasn't been divided up into really small pieces. And yet, well, it's confusing. It hasn't been divided up into pieces, but it seems to have spawned huge amplitude waves poleward of it. So I don't really get that. Usually it's the wave of the jet breaking up that is manifest in the waves, but I don't know, there's some kind of hybrid maybe going on here this time. So that's a really interesting subtropical jet. We have to get a longer view of that in a minute. And then on the northeastern side of the big ridge, the only real semblance of the polar jet over North America is right there over Hudson Bay, eastern Hudson Bay. And then another piece of it here from Greenland to Iceland in the Icelandic Sea. But that is it. So much of the Western Hemisphere is polar jet less. Is that Libby back there? No, it's not. It's Eric. I thought Libby was here. Okay, so there's maybe no polar jet in the Northern Hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere right now. Really interesting. So that's in line with the groundhog, right? If there's no polar jet, that means there's no substantial barochronicity, and you can see that. We started at 500 with -12 at Lake Winnipeg. It's not cold anywhere over North America right now. Patrick Beatty told me there was no snow on the ground at Duluth on January 31st. I don't know when the last time that was true, on that late day of the year. So there's nothing really working towards, first of all, cosmologically, of course, we're past the point where the sun is starting to rise now at all these high latitudes. It's hotter and hotter every day that goes by to manufacture cold air just by 24 hours of radiation. And if you don't have snow on the ground, which is true in much of central Canada, that makes the job even harder. And then anything that might get created and dislodged and head southward is going to be modified. This is, nobody lives here, but it's still a lot of land, and so there's a lot of modification that can go on if it's not snow covered. And so all these things are working against a continuation or a revisit of that desperate cold air that we had earlier this month, or well, last month now. So it's interesting. I want to cap that off in a minute, but I won't say it right now. Can we go to 250, Pete? My guess is we'll see less of that polar jet. Not really. But, and more of the subtropical. 188 gets a little stronger the higher you go, and it seems kind of connected across the Gulf of Mexico with a little bit of a weakness right south of New Orleans. But that's a very strong and fairly continuous, almost 90 degrees in longitude for that subtropical jet feature. Maybe go to 200 and see what happens to this. Yeah, it's a little weaker, but that's a pretty robust polar jetlet. And then the subtropical feature remains pretty strong, but even that has its core at 250, not 200. So that is the picture over us. I don't know what happens when you have a big anticyclone subjected to barotropic cyclonic shear. That's kind of an interesting question, but that's what's happening here over the central U.S. If all that happens is that the axis gets tilted more like this, I guess that prolongs the ridges, I would guess. And I don't know if that's the answer, but that's one thing to think about. can we go to, let's see.
Lower down or?
Yeah, I want to go lower down. Let's start at 700. And so the structure looks just about identical. It's really quite remarkable how similar it looks. So this is almost an equivalent barotropic ridge and high amplitude ridge. Everything looks similar at 700 as it did at 500. And I'll point out one more time, the lack of baroclinicity, except here in the Yukon, on the border of the Yukon Territory with Alaska. That's pretty strong temperature contrast. It's minus 30 in the interior of Alaska. And then when you barely get into British Columbia, you're talking about minus 9 or minus 5. It's minus 6 here. Is that Kamloops, British Columbia? Minus 6 is very warm at 700 millibars. Let's see what it looks like at 850. And it's plus 1 at International Falls at 700 millibars. That's July 4th for them. 3 degrees at 850. There's the only cold pool, and it's very small in scale. And we saw it first manifest at 700, so it's a shallow, low-level cold pool. And it's maybe that's going to have something to say about what goes on in the Pacific Northwest in the next week to 10 days, but it's not big enough to really get me concerned or excited. I think mostly it would be excited for me. And then broad warm advection over northern Saskatchewan, southern Hudson Bay, and that is, if there's any snow anywhere in these locations, that's going to do some damage to that. So further evidence that Phil flipped his groundhog coin in the right direction maybe this year. But I'll just point out also that, you know how many weeks there are between February 2nd and March 21st? You probably guessed, there's 6. So what is the value of this prediction? You know, is it going to be 6 more weeks of winter? Yes, there is. But is it really going to be cold past March 21? No, it never is. So who cares? But the movie's great. Okay, so it looks very similar at all levels. It's remarkable how almost barotropic this is, and only small places where there's sizable and organized temperature advection, one of them just to our north, which doesn't bode well for a continuation of wintertime weather in the long run anyway. So now, Pete, let's go to my cold pool map just for a second. So there it is. Well, it's coming. Do I have to do anything else?
I don't think so. Well, I think you've got the wrong HDMI cable plugged in.
How is there a wrong?
One of them is plugged into the camera, right?
Oh, well, that would be wrong.
That's great. So
Okay, sorry.
that explains it.
So what I'm going to show you is the time series of this year's 850 millibar cold pool with look here for extra detail sort of thing. I don't know what's going on there. Blue line in the middle is the average for each calendar day. And you can see, this is interesting just in and of itself. February 1st, 2nd is the peak. This is where we start to lose cold air in the hemisphere. In other words, it starts to warm up. So there's no doubt that we're at the point where we should expect a decrease in the aerial extent every day. Look at what's happened, though, since I guess, January 10th until now, with a couple of episodes. At a time when we were expecting an increase, we got a big increase. There was a big buildup of cold air. And then our cold snap is in the yellow. And that was the beginning, the commencement of a strong and continued decrease. So for a period of time in the last 7 or 10 days, when we're getting close to the peak, but still increasing climatologically, tremendous decline. So through the 31st of January, this time series is the 4th warmest ever in this now 77-year time series. So we have a chance if we just mimic the slope of this and start here and kind of go down like this, we'll probably be the warmest winter of all time in the Northern Hemisphere through the month of February. So I'm hoping for that. Since it's been so boring, we might as well get a trophy out of it. You know, that's what I think. So I don't know if you agree, but I'd love to see that. I was encouraged when I came home because I think last Friday before we left, I saw that. Oh, let's keep going. I don't want to see a big spike up, and it just kind of gallied around there. And one of those days was an all-time minimum. That was probably last Friday. So we've had at least 1, 2 all-time minimums this year for the cold pool. So that's not easy to come by, but we've done it. So again, this is evidence to me, with all the other circumstances we talked about, that I think it's going to be hard to expect, it's not reasonable maybe to expect, that the rest of this month in February is going to suddenly return us to the winter. So I think the groundhog made the right call today, or his handlers, or whatever you call it. The right answer is the winter is over. So imagine how much money there is to be made there on this question. We've talked about this. North Face, Land's End, all these other outerwear companies, they don't have warehouses anymore. That's, for some reason, it's passé. So they have a glut of inventory that maybe they haven't sold because the prior part of the winter has been warm. When do you tell them the winter is over? And I think, I have a friend who works in the School of Retail Science, and he used to work at Target, he was the CEO at Target, and he told me if they knew the answer to that, they would say on February 1st, let's drop everything for this season 70% off and beat all of these. It's going to be a ratcheting down in the other companies. They're going to start at 30% off, 40% off, and so on, and slowly wean down to 75, everything must go. If you do the everything must go, you clear the decks, you're going to take a hit anyway, but you beat all your competitors. And he says that would be a formula for success. And if you could just say, when is the winter over? So I've had that in the back of my mind for about 10 years. I don't want to get rich, I just want to know the answer to that. I'd like to know when, but I could do both.
Yeah.
But I'd like to know when the winter is going to be over. You know, I don't know. But I have a feeling we're at its weight right now. Or we're at the hospital bed, and we're not expecting anything to happen.
It's like 1 week of snow and 1 week of cold, and that was it. That was
Yeah,
winter.
that's it, and it's all contained right in here.
Yep.
And there was a buildup before it got cold in North America, so it must have gotten cold somewhere else first, and then came down. So investigating this period could be really quite interesting.
So what's interesting is, I think the last couple of days, Scandinavia has been really cold, like record-breaking.
Is that
cold.
right?
But
that's
I
it.
don't see here, yeah.
That's it.
That's the one spot coldest.
And in the warmest year ever, the 2013-14 winter, by this measure, when we had a really desperate cold snap in eastern North America, this thing, the time series across the hemisphere showed nothing. So it takes a lot. I thought this North American one would, because when you get a big, widespread cold event like we had, it covers the whole continent. That's a big part of the area, but it doesn't even really register. It's amazing. So a really interesting winter. Any other comments or questions on the current weather or things related to it? Okay, let's take a look at the forecast, which is unfortunately not that interesting. So it isn't, there's just nothing on the horizon. Let's see.
You want this or Alicia's page?
Oh yeah, let's do that. Yeah, right there. Okay, so here's the North Pacific. This is valid at 12Z. It's a 12-hour forecast from this morning. And so you can see this extended jet. Remember, we were seeing all of this in our discussion of the current weather. And it extends all the way back and almost in a continuous ribbon at a speed of about 60 knots all the way across the Pacific Basin, which is very unusual. I don't know where this sits on Maria's SOM maps, but I'm guessing it's in the neighborhood of one of the extended jets, super extended jets, though it is in two pieces. But cyclone number 1, and everything's west of the date line. So that's a pretty intense little disturbance. Look at the thermal structure and the thickness wrapping back in there like that. It's beautiful. Let's just page through this and see what happens to that storm first. There it is. It wraps up nicely and then kind of just sits there as a big Aleutian low. So the Aleutian low is now pretty robust. Let's see what happens next with this one. That one goes in and kind of replenishes the Aleutian low disturbance. The next one gets even more interesting. I think it's the next one. Let's see. No, it isn't the next one. It's not that one. So we need one after that. But that's another storm that goes in and gets caught in this giant Aleutian low. It's this one here. Where does this one come from? And then look at the development. Really decent development. Better at 6Z, but from the 6Z forecast. But even this one, it's a pretty decent development. Another one, and then there's yet another one. But if we can go back, Pete, I'm interested in how this one comes to be. So,
They came out of the center of the jet.
yeah, that's exactly right. There's a region of low pressure sitting right in the center of the jet. It's hard to really understand what the origin of that was. So we're going back, I'd say that's the same vorticity disturbance, and there's the south coast of Japan. So something gets organized right there on the south coast of Japan to the west of the prominent jet, and a little stubby one to its west. And let's see what goes on when we go forward now from there. And then it gets stretched out as this jet gets a little bit more elongated. The axis of dilatation along the jet is probably like that. So this thing is having a hard time spinning up in the face of that. It stays linear for a long time, gets to the jet exit region, and then suddenly maybe the vertical motion gets a little more concentrated instead of linear, and the thing just explodes. We're at 1,000 millibars right here. That's probably, let's see, I want to make sure I get the number right. That's 996, okay. That's 998. And so it turns in a pretty decent development period there while we have this deep Aleutian low. Anytime you have this feature, you tend to have an extended jet. Anytime you have an extended jet, the exit region is going to be here, and it replenishes that. So there's some systematic feedback that has to be interrupted And I'm not sure what the mechanism is of that interruption, but it's a great open question. How does that get interrupted and start to change course?
It's a pretty substantial high between those jets too, like a giant Bermuda high sitting off California.
Yeah, there's one there, and there's this one off of the Kamchatka Peninsula, which is another interesting question. Lake Baikal's right about here, and so the Siberian Mongolian High pulsates all winter long. What role does that play in this? In Florida, we've been talking about that earlier this year. So there's things to do there, and I'm not sure that's not part of the whole complexion that evolves over the Pacific Basin, whether it's in an extended jet mode or a retracted mode. It's got to have some role. And in addition to that, we're getting into February. In February, the anomalous temperature around Beijing is correlated to the size of the cold pool. So if it's colder or warmer than normal around, well, Beijing's back here, but if it's colder or warmer than normal in Beijing, that is a decent indicator. It's a 45% correlation between that and the size of the cold pool. So, and that undoubtedly has to do with the Siberian Mongolian High. So there's all these connections that have to be explained dynamically. I don't like the statistical ones baldly like that. They don't give you much physical insight, but there must be some physical insight lying underneath those relationships. And the question is, how do you discern those relationships? And that's the research question. So, okay, so this is an active Pacific jet, and it's trying to stay extended for a prolonged period of time. They often last at least 10 days, and so we're seeing that here in this forecast, because this is only 6 days out. And there's continuous cyclogenesis going on at the exit region of the jet, no matter how far out it goes. And so this is a somewhat abnormal place for strong cyclogenesis, because the jet is not usually extended so far to the east. Okay. And it's not a coincidence that they have the surfing championships in Hawaii in February, because this becomes more common. And so the swell gets built around these cyclones and comes hitting the islands, and they get big waves. So all that stuff is climatological. Really interesting. But that's it for the Pacific. I don't have anything more to say about the Pacific. But I want to go to the continental U.S., where boredom unfortunately ensues. So let's start at 500 millibars, Pete. Go to 12 hours in the forecast. So if you can look through the pixelated nature of the vorticity, because that's the benefit of the high resolution model, you can see the big ridge, and the axis at this time tilts from, sort of the Lake of the Woods all the way down to maybe New Orleans. So that's about how it looks, just like that. We'll see if that changes its orientation. Remember, we had a strong subtropical jet to the south. My guess is that maybe this thing gets tilted more this way in the face of that. I don't know if that's what happens. So upstream of the ridge, there's a broad trough, but nothing particularly well organized at this time. This is tonight. And downstream of it, we already saw this kind of troughiness with quite local to the position of the curvature is where you see any precipitation. That's currently the case right now. And nothing upstream except the vortex barrier, which to me, it's a barrier to the cold air. There's nothing very cold south of this line of strong shear. That's my guess. And that goes all the way down to California. So we're not going to get cold this week. So let's go ahead at the same level, maybe 24 hours first. Let's go to 36 hours in the forecast, see if we see anything. I think it's a fairly stagnant pattern. And so maybe going this long is a good idea. International Falls is still right there, but now we're off the coast of Florida. So this thing does seem to turn counterclockwise, the ridge axis. And so that means northerly flow over the eastern United States, means southeasterly flow to our west, and almost none over us. So this is going to be, I think this will be the end of the period of high clouds, maybe, or low clouds. Maybe we'll get some high clouds in on top of it, so the weather conditions might get worse. Strong subtropical jet still presumed to be here, and this wave is going to get itself revved up. But there's no place for it to go. In normal track, it's not going to head to the Great Lakes. It's going to probably get stretched into the northern plain states. So that's a big transition in one day, and it does seem to conform to the suspicion I had that the axis will be turned cyclonically. And then here's the feature off the Atlantic coast. That looks like it's going to now be in a position for a more substantial surface development. So I think I'd like to see what the sea level pressure map looks like at 36 hours here. Maybe there's something brewing south of us and something well to the northeast. So here's the precipitation, a weak cyclone over the Texas Panhandle, but that's the precipitation that's kind of right at the base of that trough that's been tilted so strongly negatively. And here's the beginnings of a nice cyclogenesis event off of maritime Canada. Very strong thermal contrast right in the northwest quadrant where the vorticity is, so there's strong PVA by the thermal wind. That's what drives the cyclogenesis here. And the vortex that results starts to spin up into something that has a thermal ridge. And so it all starts to fall into place as a normal, nearly occluding cyclone. And then we had that other trough feature off the coast of California that's turned into a pretty decent looking, somewhat elongated wave. And I don't know if the atmospheric river people would be saying that's related to, or there's a river event about to happen, but I'm sure that along the southern 2/3 of the California coast, there's been a water advisory or whatever they call it, because that thing's impending, it looks like. But we're high and dry and really warm. This is the 546 thickness line. It goes all the way to the west, to Churchill, Manitoba. So we're just kind of socked in with warm, I'd say slightly warm polar air. That's what I call it. It's not really cold, and it's certainly not going to get any colder. So let's go to 48 hours at 500 millibars. Continuation of roughly the same pattern. I think that International Fall seems to be the pivot point, being close to the anticyclone center. We keep swinging this thing more and more in a counterclockwise fashion. And there's our upper trough off the East Coast that is looks a little more dilapidated actually than it did before. This is the feature that might cause some problems in San Francisco down to LA, it looks like. Pretty strong upper vortex structure. I'll bet there's better cyclogenesis and closer to the coast by this time. I don't know what to think. It's kind of fun to imagine what's going to be the situation down in the southeast. Maybe that big precipitation region will have moved into Alabama, but that's, I'm going to guess that's all that's happened, not any big cyclogenesis. Let's see if I'm right. That was at 48, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're barely 997. Precipitation's moved over to off the coast of St. Pete, Tampa. It's kind of widespread lighter along the southeasterly flow of the upper ridge. We still stay dry. This cyclone's a little more impressive. It's down to 986, and the barochronicity is tight on the northwest side. That's where it's precipitating heavily. Probably snow in parts of New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, maybe even Newfoundland by this time. And there's a decent cyclone right off the coast of California. Heavy rain from Bodega Bay down to, I don't know, north of LA, probably during the day on Sunday. And then we already said something about this. The storm's getting a little stronger, but not much more intense. The big ridge, well, I shouldn't say it's a big ridge. The sea level pressure is at 1028 over the Upper Peninsula, Lake Michigan and Lake Superior. It's not really stellar, but it's hard to move because of the configuration of the upper flow. And that gets us all the way to early morning Sunday with pretty decent weather. Probably, though, socked in with clouds, like now. Let's see, I guess we'll go one more time, Pete. We gotta get out of here.
60 or 72?
Let's go to 72. By which time it's really hard to see the prior structure. This lower latitude trough is kind of slid all the way across the Gulf of Mexico. I'd say this is the old ridge axis in the subtropics, and this is still the coastal ridge in the middle troposphere. So it's just kind of gotten stretched out, and it's no longer amenable to a single pointer being the axis. But yeah, it's getting itself cut off. And the feature off the west coast is getting a little bit, this is the trough, but then downstream of the trough, the flow is straight, so I think it loses a little bit of its potency as well. Nothing really particularly interesting here. Maybe there'd be an upper front, but it won't last long, I don't think. Here's a nice looking treble clef structure in the vorticity. So there's probably a really nicely occluded cyclone just south of Newfoundland, and we'll take a look at that at sea level first, maybe at 850 after that. So 980 millibars is the minimum pressure. The thermal structure is not what I expected in the thickness field. It's really just the strong barochronicity tied to the jet, and then widespread weak barochronicity. So this thing maybe has gone past its really potent stage. It's good for the fishermen. They don't want to be caught in a big storm, but that's kind of lost some of its punch. And then this thing here has kind of gotten sheared off away into just a collection of isolated thunder showers or amalgamated thunder showers. It's not really a well-organized cyclone anymore. Lowest pressure I see is 998. So that's kind of gone away. We've stayed precipitation-free all the way through Monday morning. And the West Coast has a couple of weak disturbances developing. This one's 1,000 millibars, and there's nothing at all left of a feature over Southern California. So even if they have a threat on Saturday and Sunday, that threat won't be 4 days long, like some of them have been. So that's what it looks like for the weekend. And you know, we are at boring central. I mean, nothing has happened here all weekend long, and that remains the case through Monday, unfortunately.
Should we look at the 850?
Oh yeah, let's look at 850. I want to see what the thermal structure looks like. Yeah,
pretty homogeneous.
it's very not occluded at all here. It's a strong baroclinic zone from Iceland all the way down to Newfoundland, but this thing is kind of an appendage to that. It's not really doing anything to it. The same is true with the cyclone down here. There's really no baroclinicity. That's less surprising. It takes a lot to organize baroclinic zones, even in February this far south. And look at how, as you said, Pete, how homogenized that temperature is.
Yeah, it's nuts.
It speaks to utter boredom. I mean, it really, it's gonna be a struggle to come in and look at the weather maps next week, and, but one must do it. It's a clinical exercise. You have to do it every day if you wanna really learn these things.
It might be in the 50s late in the week, so you can go outside.
Yeah, right, on your phone or something. Even this region of strong northerly flow, middling cold advection, although it does look textbook. It's kind of nice how where you get the strong deformation, the gradient gets stronger. That's nice, but it's not exciting. So we'll get through the first 6th or so of February with nothing to talk about here, except look around at the hemisphere and see if we're going to set a record. And I don't know. All Magic 8 Ball says yes. All signals seem to point in the same direction. So we'll see. Could be a big celebration at the end of this month. Okay, that's all I have. Thanks for your attention, Pete. Thank you for driving.
Thank you.
And we'll see you all next week. Just as I start to hear murmuring in the hall. Perfect time.
Right, yeah, it's good timing.
Yeah.